Hello, and welcome to Survey Magazine's webinar series. The title of today's webinar is Customer Experience Management Program. Today's event is sponsored by QuestBack. My name is John Lehman, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I want to review a few housekeeping items and let you know how you can participate in today's session. Throughout our presentation, we encourage you to interact with our speaker by typing in questions and comments using the questions pane on the right side of your screen. We will be collecting your questions and comments during the presentation and conducting a Q&A answer period after today's presentation. If you'd like to join the conversation on Twitter, the hashtag is #SurveyWebinar. The title and handle for today's guest is @QuestBack. We'd love to have you connect with us and keep the conversation going beyond today's event. Also, we're recording today's session, and we'll make the link to the recording available 48 hours post our event. You'll get an email to that effect. Now on to today's speaker. Darren Bosick, Senior Methodologist at QuestBack, comes from a tremendous background of marketing research, predictive analytics, and CRM experience. He has expertise in many facets of the customer research sciences, including voice of the customer strategies, customer lifetime value, and segmentation. Darren will be joined by Robert Caldwell, Insight Solutions Director for QuestBack. I'd like to be the first to welcome Darren and Robert to today's event and turn the program over to them now. Darren, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, John. Hello, everyone. I'm Darren Bosick, research methodologist with QuestBack. We're a software and services company that specializes in customer and employee feedback, and we're really happy that you're here with us today for our webinar about elevating your customer experience management program with panels and communities. So briefly going over today's agenda, first we'll look at how customer experience management has evolved over the last few years. We'll look at some of the differences between panels and communities for customer feedback programs. We'll also look at some of the best ways to build panels and communities and integrate them into your CEM program. Then we'll take a look at some of the critical metrics and key performance indicators that are required for a successful CEM program. We have a few case studies of successful uses of panels and communities for customer experience feedback. And we'll also look at how to get your senior management to buy into panels and community building. And finally, we'll look a little bit at the technology that's required for all of this. And then we'll have time for your questions. So right now I'd like to turn it over to Bob, who will take you through the first part of our presentation. Bob?
Great, thanks, Darren. Okay, so there are a lot of terms that swirl around this evolving process of listening to customers in an organized, systematic way to improve how companies do their business. So there's a lot of understandable confusion about what to call this process. And you know, we're not going to sort out all the terms today, but we know that this can be a little bit confusing. Software companies have done a pretty good job of developing solutions that align to different approaches of incorporating customer feedback, but there's certainly some overlap. That's because listening to customers in an organized, systematic way is still relatively new as a business function, and it's evolving, and that's fine. Different types of companies and different types of industries are figuring out what works best. So for this webinar, we're going to be relying heavily on the terms customer experience management and voice of the customer to define the function. And while we won't sort out all the terms today, we will have something to say about these two, panels and communities, and how they fit into this customer experience management process. So what are the differences between an online panel and an online community? You know, there are really three. You know, first, how do members engage with the group? Members of a panel are typically more reactive. You know, here's a survey to take. Members of community are asked to be a bit more engaged and open in the kind of information they share. So give us your thoughts on this, or what do you think about this? Also, community members engage with each other. So that's the first one. The second one here is, you know, the type of data. Panels are where a lot of surveys take place. So it's where more, you know, quantitative data is typically collected. Members of communities take surveys as well, but also provide a lot of unstructured or qualitative data back to the host. So those are the big ones. The third is size. Historically, panels are, also quite large because they are really just databases. And given how transactional they are, members don't really know or even care how big of a panel they're in. They don't have any way of interacting with other members. Now, communities can grow to be quite large too, but they're typically smaller. Those are some of the big ones there. So let's look at this in terms of customer experience. What matters here in terms of customer experience, as far as panels or communities, which works best? Well, the ideal is both, right? They both have a role to play in the customer management process. You may have a large panel that contains most of your customers, but several smaller communities coming off of that for certain types of segments of customers. So with that in mind, the terms don't really matter. Call your group whatever you want and use either term. And if you want a term, you can just call it panel community or panel communities. We'll talk more about how to use panel communities for customer experience in a moment. Let's see where all this came from. So what are the origins of voice of the customer or customer experience management? The term has been around for a while, but voice of the customer developed in the 1990s. An important article by the same name was written by two academics, one at University of Chicago, one at MIT, Abby Griffin and John Hauser, in 1993. They described voice of the customer as a way of aligning a company's engineering and marketing functions in something that they called QFD, or quality function deployment. So its origins were really in quality and product manufacturing. And we can look a little bit more of the history here, we can look at the history of voice of the customer. We see that the term, was appearing in the 1990s with the Griffin and Hauser article, yes, and we can back up a bit further because their work grew out of the TQM movement, or total quality management, and that came onto the scene in the 1980s. And as the name implies, it was all about improving the quality of products. So TQM had a manufacturing focus, incorporating customer demand into engineering. So we've come a long way. Moving into the 1990s, we see an explosion of CRM software as technology allowed for relatively easy storage of large amounts of customer data. But the data is very basic, and a lot of companies struggled with those large, complicated implementations, and the payoff wasn't really there in managing customer relationships. But the need to better manage these relationships continued to grow. Okay, so we fast forward to now, and there's really three forces that combine to create the present state of the CEM function. First of all, competitive pressures build everywhere, making positive customer experiences a business imperative for all types of companies, whether they be product manufacturing companies or service companies. Okay, the other one is technology. Technology evolves beyond that basic storage of data and actually enables a business process for CEM. And then the last one, of course, is the internet. The internet becomes a channel for many things, but also an efficient way to collect customer feedback. And that, of course, is an input into improving customer experience. Okay, so there's some of the history. Let's look at some of the components of a CEM program. If you do an internet search on customer experience management, you can pull up a lot of graphics because everyone sort of has a way of drawing this out. Here's a few that we found and some common elements, not too surprising, but just a few of them probably worth calling out if you're developing your own program. Governance. These are the rules on which your CEM program is going to run. Also, alignment is an important term here, aligning the program to senior leadership and to the larger organization, so it doesn't operate in isolation of that. And then, of course, listening, and this is where the actual work of collecting customer feedback takes place. And that's where some technology comes in. Reporting, analysis, and interpretation of what's heard. That's where some technology comes in as well. And then, of course, applying what's learned to improve customer experience, which is the whole point of it. So let's relate this back to panels and communities. Our point here is, how you organize your customers into panel communities should be purposeful, and the organization should, that organization of those groups should support the larger strategy of your own CEM function. Okay, let's take a look at types of panels and communities. What are some of the characteristics that we see for a panel or community, panel communities for customer experience? Here's what we found. Obviously company directed. They can be of any size. They can be, if you're a business to business, they can be all of your customers, or if you're a consumer company, they a sample of your customers. They can be any size, private, invitation only, and they can be linked to other customer data. There's incentives for participation, and the output is some kind of research, right? And they can be either short-term or long-term. There's other types of panels and communities out there online. These are typically public, open, anonymous. There's no incentive, and the output is not research. It's really, it can be reused as an input into research, but sometimes just user-generated content. The types of panels and communities. So let's look at some of the applications here. What are some of the applications for a voice of the customer program? Here's what we find our clients using them for. New product development and concept work, existing product development, in-home product testing, shopper insights, shopper missions, mystery shopping, that kind of thing, and then feedback on an array of different things, right? Feedback on service, feedback on some kind of advertising or marketing communications, feedback on pricing, or feedback on your competitive products, and then of course other public panels and communities, they center on something like a special interest or support group, or center on an education or school program, that kind of thing. Okay. So let's take a look at the composition. Who's actually in these panels and communities? Well, there's an obvious answer here, right? The obvious answer is that there's customers inside these panels and communities. That's fine. As I said earlier, when setting up your program strategy, you want to have that strategy reflected in how you sort of recruit and organize your customers into panels and communities. It has to support the goals of your program. So here's some ways that you can recruit for your panel community. Brand advocates. These are customers that are very heavily engaged with your company or your brands, and you can also have just a nice array of existing customers. These would be maybe organized by some kind of proprietary customer segmentation, which most companies have of some kind, and then maybe targeted customers. These are customers that aren't yours. They might be someone else's, but they could be lapsed customers. These are customers that you're trying to acquire. Or you could organize your panel community around, category enthusiasts, the category in which you compete, or the categories in which you compete. You might just want to have a cross-section of those enthusiasts, or people who are willing to talk about that category. And of course, you can have some kind of hybrid as well. Now, these two here, brand advocates and existing customers, those are two types where you can actually link those to other CRM data, so you can have a 360 view of your customers, right? Because you're going to have other information on them, most likely. Okay, so that's the composition here. I'm going to give it over to Darren, and Darren, you can bring us through building and managing.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, so when it comes to building and managing panels for customer experience feedback, there's many critical success factors, and these include recruiting suitable panelists, customers really based on your research needs, and recruiting those panelists into various segments, such as based on their value to your company or their level of use of your products or services. You also want to make sure that you generate emails or other communication to the panelists. You want to create surveys that keep the panelists highly engaged and invite the correct participants to take those surveys. Importantly, you want to ensure that the data from those surveys is accurate and measurable. And you want to provide some sort of reward systems. You want to incentivize the panelists for taking your surveys. It's important to also have a panel homepage that's designed and welcoming for the panelists so that they'll feel like they're really contributing to something that's important, something critical, that the feedback is going to be used to plan strategy. And the more you can automate the panel management process and all the functions associated with it, the easier it is to field the research and generate those results. Now, if you currently don't have a panel, we find that there's typically a 4-phase process to building it. It all starts with acquiring the customer panelists who will respond to your research projects and inquiries. That phase is typically a double opt-in process, one where you'll invite the customer to join, typically through an email, but then get them to confirm their membership through some sort of more rigorous profile survey that will ask them questions about their demographics. The next phase is actually managing the panel. So you'll effectively build and maintain the panel by tracking several things like metrics around the panel health, looking at number of surveys that you send out, number of completes per panelist, time it takes to complete a survey. The third phase is reward management, and that's where you'll develop that incentive program, making sure that your panelists are adequately rewarded and compensated for their time on the panel. And the fourth phase is retention, and that's where you'll look to re-engage panelists who are at risk for leaving the panel or those who have already left. Because keep in mind, it's much more costly to acquire a new panelist than to really go and extend the lifetime value of the current panelists. So anything you can do to keep panelists engaged or reactivate a lost panelist will go a long way in increasing your return on your overall panel investment. Now, unlike customer panels, online customer communities enable you to conduct a much more qualitative customer experience research, as Bob was saying earlier. You can use a lot of different media, from text to videos, pictures, images, across many different devices, cell phones, tablets, computers. You can use things like forums and bulletin boards to really bridge that gap between the quantitative that you might get from the panel and this qualitative research. And that's done by getting your community members to really interact and engage with one another in dialogue. So online communities really give you that flexibility to go out and create these subgroups of customers so that you can conduct much more focused online discussions about their customer experiences. And this online discussion allows the community members to really voice their opinions, to really show what the perception is of not only your brands, but other community members, and respond to those members' postings. And by monitoring those discussions, you'll be able to assess different customer experience topics and help to really gauge a good idea of how much your customers know about your brand and what they perceive about your brands. The idea here is to really get your customers talking to one another about their experiences and creating a very rich view from those different opinions from different kinds of customers. Now, one company that we can talk about here that has really done a good job of creating this online community experience for customer feedback is Time Warner Music. They've built a community of more than 10,000 music fans. They all have expressed their willingness to make statements about their music habits, how they buy music, how they are influenced by media to make music purchase decisions, where and how they listen to music. So really they can gather a lot of information about the music experience. Members are asked to really assess how new advertising campaigns from Time Warner might influence the next album that they purchase. The members have access to thousands of songs by new artists in both video and sound file right on the community website. So Time Warner uses this feedback about its customer experiences to develop very targeted advertising campaigns and really optimize the way it spends its advertising. And the community feedback also serves as a big opportunity for Time Warner Music to really test and try out new ideas before it actually goes to market. And that really saves the company from making a lot of expensive mistakes in the long run. And of course, the members are rewarded for their participation. They get bonus points that they can redeem for products such as new music that comes out, or they can participate in things like online raffles. So one added benefit to community-based feedback research is that it's asynchronous. So what I mean by that is that it occurs when the participant has the time to do it. So your community members can leisurely respond to things like a forum question or react to another member's comment in a discussion group, or they can keep a daily or weekly online diary about their consistent experiences with your brands. All that is done on their time. And that's opposite to synchronous-based types of research, which is things like in-depth interviews or online focus groups. Synchronous research methods really work better when you're trying to capture feedback soon after an event occurs. So you can best harness this asynchronous research for customer experience management by keeping the community members highly engaged with many different types of projects that occur a lot more frequently, so that they're involved with giving their feedback about their latest experiences with your brands and able to react to different types of questions about how they experience your brand at different times. Now, obviously, there are different times to collect the feedback. So integrating panels and communities into your CEM program really involves reaching out to your customers based on their level of engagement with your company, how long they've been with a customer of yours, and at different times throughout the year. So it's really critical to understand when it's necessary for you to get the feedback from the right type of customer. And different research approaches are often applied for different types of customers. So for example, you might create a monthly questionnaire that goes out to customers that you consider a lost account or a declining account or a small volume account. That survey would ask the primary buyer of your product about specific needs that might not have been met or why they might have switched to a competitor. And that research approach would differ from, let's say, your high value or your key accounts, where you would survey the purchase decision maker who might be a C-suite executive. And that would happen once or twice a year, and you'd probably want to create a much more customized and personalized relationship building type of research questionnaire that's more focused on questions around customer loyalty and customer satisfaction. Now, one thing that's becoming very common to many customer experience types of programs and are incorporated in panel types of research is the Net Promoter Score, or NPS. And NPS is really serving as a model to measure customer loyalty for many businesses. In fact, many businesses say it's the foundation for their measurement program. It's just one question: how likely is it that you would recommend our brand to a friend? So that can easily be integrated into research conducted with your panel or with your community. And companies are using NPS to measure the level of customer loyalty and overall brand health by being able to separate the respondents into these three key buckets of detractors, fence-sitters, or those who feel passive about the brand, and promoters or loyalists. So once these buckets of customers are created, companies are finding that these segments of NPS scores within the panel or community can then be used for additional research purposes. So you can go back out and survey your detractors, for example, to understand more about why they might have negative sentiment towards your brand. So many companies are saying that really this one metric of NPS is all you need to know to successfully to understand customer loyalty. And in fact, research shows that customers who are referred to your business, they often have 16% higher lifetime value than those who are not referred to your company. And in fact, 83% of customers that are considered in the promoter type of bucket are willing to refer your brand's products and services to a friend. So it clearly pays to understand which of your customers are those promoters, which are detractors, and to really track that NPS score over time. But we also feel that the key to a successful NPS program is to supplement those findings with more research. And that's typically done by integrating NPS within the panel and community environment so that you can create additional metrics and different types of feedback research. And there are many metrics that you can use to leverage your panel and community to develop those insights. You can create a loyalty index, for example. So collecting NPS as the sole metric to gauge customer loyalty might work for some, but not all companies. So it might be best or better to develop this loyalty index by just adding 2 additional survey questions. What is your overall satisfaction, and what is your likelihood to renew or repurchase from us again? And then use the NPS with those 2 additional questions to create this index. You might want to also supplement the feedback research you're getting. So getting your customer panel interviews with additional feedback from, let's say, the passive group or the detractor segment. And that can be done by a quick follow-up survey with questions about their dissatisfaction or questions about ways to improve their overall service or support or the products that you are delivering to them. That can go a long way to improving your overall NPS health. A root cause analysis. So trying to create survey questions that really dig into customer value or product quality or service satisfaction. That can really create the types of variables that will really help you conduct this root cause analysis that gets at what is really driving loyalty. What are the key drivers of my customer loyalty? Comparisons to benchmarks. So setting goals for improving your NPS scores will also mean collecting benchmark NPS data about your competitors in your industry. And there is available information from third parties that looks at NPS data across different industries and companies. And finally, tracking and trending promoters. So growing your share of promoters, or the big bucket of those that really do recommend you as a company, is often a primary goal for NPS. So it's also critical to get feedback from your promoter group about whether they have indeed recently recommended you to someone, and then tracking how the promoters behave by tying their NPS scores to other types of transactional data that you might have, such as how much they recently purchased from you, or how frequently they call your call center. Now, the airline industry is really a good example of one industry that's using NPS measurement across all of its customer touch points. So by creating a touch map of the way that the airlines interact with its customers, they can then leverage a panel and a community to do additional research and get at those additional metrics about how to improve those interactions at each touch point. So if you think about it, an airline strives to give its passengers really good service, a really good experience along each step of the passenger journey, from the booking of the ticket to the in-flight experience, right up until the time they collect their baggage at the final destination. So the airline can build a customer feedback panel that's comprised of different customer value segments. That can include, let's say, only first-class passengers, and then another segment for business class passengers or economy customers. So the higher value customers, they would be invited to participate in an exclusive community. They can then ask those passengers to opt in to receive surveys on their mobile devices about their travel experience right after they arrive at their final destination. The airline can then have very valuable insights about how those valuable customers are experiencing the brand across all of its touch points, and then the airline can dedicate resources to make changes where things might be lacking. So, for example, improving in-flight food service or changing the way that tickets are processed. And more importantly, the airline, since it will include the NPS question, will be able to understand its ratings at each of those touch points. So now that we've covered how to integrate panels and communities within the CEM program, you might be thinking, well, how can I really convince upper management to buy into all of this? And it really doesn't have to be that difficult a process. So we recommend first that you first clearly define the panel or the community or both, and tell management that you really want to create this because it's going to benefit the entire company. So you have to first lay out the details in plain terms that will get management to understand that you are going to be calling on customers to do surveys or focus groups or in-depth interviews, to participate in community activities, all about their customer experience so that you can understand their feedback to improve it. Then you really want to accentuate quality by stressing that You'll very carefully manage the customer responses that you get. You won't over-survey customers. You won't under-reward them for their time. So management really needs to know that the feedback data you get will be very high quality. It's also helpful to tell management that the setup costs for panel and community building can be deferred over several months, for example. So in the meantime, you'll be recruiting customers into your panel or your community, and you'll begin to do research right away. And that in itself will take a giant step toward getting a higher return on your initial investment. And finally, we think that there's nothing better than having this pool of respondents available to you at a moment's notice when you really need to get some quick answers about your customer experience. So managing your own customer panel or community can bring about those insights much faster than if you were to outsource it or not to have a panel or community. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Bob, who can wrap things up for us.
Thanks, Darren. Okay, so after you have your senior management aligned, setting up a customer experience program does take a little bit of effort, but the effort can be diminished if you think it through in a particular way. Here's a potential or an example rollout program of a customer experience program. So first of all, getting organized. This is where that governance that it gets brought in. Okay, this is the governance, the rules, how this program is going to work. Sometimes customer experience measurements are used for compensation, so it can become a very politically charged program. So you want to work all of that out before you get this thing up and running. So this is also where you might want to do some initial analysis on your customer base. How satisfied are your customers? What's the baseline? What's driving satisfaction? Do you have good customer segmentation? Is it accurate? Okay, so we get organized, and then we actually build the infrastructure. So now we're going to start, organizing how we're going to collect and report the feedback information within the organization. This is where primarily the quantitative side is set up. What Darren was talking about with the different NPS scores or maybe other similar scores, loyalty scores, these different types of things. This is where all of that the survey regime is put up, the survey and reporting regime. And you decide things like, if you're going to be doing any event driven feedback, what events are going to trigger a survey or a survey instrument. Okay, so finally we move on to that. We activate the program. We turn the program on. Customers start getting some surveys. You start collecting some initial data. What's important here, especially because what your customers think is going to be, everyone's going to care. Everyone's going to want to know what do they think. You want to validate that data. You want to make sure that you're asking the right questions, that the data is accurate, or it's as accurate as you think it can be before you sort of roll it out even beyond that. So this is also where you might want to start developing the more qualitative part of the program and maybe building one or more customer communities where you can do sort of more moderated discussion groups, forums, this kind of thing. Okay, and then sort of the final step would be full rollout, and this is where you might want to bring your other customer enterprise data or CRM data into the program and start aligning data so you can see what they've purchased as well as what they think and this kind of thing. Okay, so there are challenges with a voice of the customer program. Forrester's identified a few that I think are worth amplifying here. I'll just go through them here. First of all, a program can be all set up to do listening. It can stop with just the listening, and it doesn't do anything with what's being heard. Okay, that's a pitfall. Also, the feedback data doesn't move around in the organization in the right way. It comes in, but it doesn't go to where it can do the most good. So that could be a reporting function, or that could just be an organizational function. Or the scheduling of the collecting the data is wrong. Feedback, if possible, should be near real time. Current technology enables that, and we're seeing that trend ourselves. As companies are moving more towards event-driven feedback versus calendar-driven feedback. So annual customer satisfaction projects. They're not really sufficient anymore for a lot of companies. And then finally, the traditional corporate market research approaches might be used as a proxy for a CEM program. And that can add a lot of cost just because of the way traditional market research, corporate market research functions. And it could force decision-making to go on without, in the absence of customer feedback, because the technology that's available isn't used to systematically collect and disseminate that information efficiently. So, in other words, in that scenario, a CEM program might look more project by project as opposed to some kind of continuous system. Okay, so those are some of the challenges here. So the reason Darren and I have some opinions on this topic is that QuestBack services this market, along with traditional market research and voice of the employee. So from a technology perspective, there's a lot of commonalities across these different markets, and so we develop our platform to service these three. So our opinions that we share today have been shaped by how we see our technology being configured to support these different business processes. Okay, so that technology, QuestBack technology, is built on a couple principles. The first is integration. Okay, integration of different capabilities that are required to run a successful CEM program. So, for example, having all the tools you need in one platform, survey and data collection, member management, community tools, as well as the various features around reporting and analysis and dashboarding, which is largely about getting those insights into the right people's hands. Having all of that integration reduces the amount of effort needed to run a CEM program. That's important. So in other words, integration of tools really translates into less effort. So it takes what could be a complicated process and it brings some simplicity to it. And then the second is flexibility. Our platform needs to align to a number of different types of CEM programs across all industries. So, there are no two alike. Everyone has a different CEM program, and as I mentioned at the beginning, the term itself is sort of floating around out there. So what one company thinks is a CEM program, another might think it's something else, all the rest of it. So the point is that the technology needs to be flexible. We have flexible technology. We take the lead in kind of configuring our system to meet, current and evolving needs for different types of CEM programs. So the companies that we work with, usually start small and then develop their program over time. And we have to meet the needs for those flexible configurations. So I think that brings us